Hi, welcome to Lies and Secrets channel. We hope you will have fun with us. Enjoy watching. I was caught in the act by my grandfather. What really happened will leave you speechless before we dive in. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more interesting and shocking stories. The room was bathed in the soft glow of the afternoon sun, filtering through the sheer curtains, casting a warm, almost ethereal light across the walls. I was alone, or so I thought, in the sanctuary of my childhood home, a place that had always been a refuge from the complexities of the world outside. My name is Isabella, and at 19 I was navigating the turbulent waters of young adulthood, trying to find my place in a world that often felt too big, too fast, too unforgiving. I remember that day vividly. The air was thick, with the scent of jasmine from the garden outside, and the house was unusually quiet. My parents were out, and I was indulging in a moment of solitude, a rare luxury in our bustling household. The silence was comforting, like a soft blanket wrapping around me, allowing me to shed the layers of pretense I wore daily. In this quiet, I found myself drawn to the forbidden, the taboo, seeking solace in the most unexpected of companions. My grandfather's old dog. Liam lay beside me, his fur soft under my touch. There was something about the innocence of his presence that made everything else seem less daunting, less real. As I lay there, lost in my own world, the door creaked open, my heart leapt into my throat, and I turned to see my grandfather standing in the doorway. His eyes, usually so warm and filled with stories, were wide with shock. His face a mask of confusion and something else I couldn't quite place. He didn't say anything. At first, the silence stretched between us, heavy and laden with unspoken questions. I scrambled to cover myself, my cheeks burning with embarrassment, but he simply turned away, closing the door softly behind him. That moment hung in the air like a photograph, capturing a scene that was meant to remain unseen. Later, when the house was filled with the sounds of dinner preparation, he approached me. His voice was low, almost a whisper, as he spoke of his past, of a pain so deep it had carved lines into his face. I once loved a woman. He began, his eyes not meeting mine, who betrayed me in ways I could never have imagined. His words were careful, measured, as if each one carried a weight. He was still learning to bear the revelation of his ex-wife's infidelity with a dog was a shock, a secret he had kept buried for years. It was a wound that had never healed. And now here I was inadvertently reopening it. The air between us was thick with the unspoken, with the gravity of what had been seen, what had been said, and what was left hanging in the balance. My grandfather's trauma, now intertwined with my own moment of vulnerability, set the stage for a narrative. Neither of us could have anticipated what would this mean for us, for the trust that had always been the foundation of our relationship. And what secrets might this house, this family still hold? The days following that uncomfortable encounter with my grandfather were filled with a tension that seemed to seep into the very walls of our home. I found myself avoiding him, the weight of his gaze too heavy to bear the unspoken questions between us, too loud in the silence. I tried to immerse myself in the normalcy of my life, seeking solace and routine. I attended my classes at the community college where I was studying psychology, hoping to understand the complexities of human behavior, perhaps even my own. But even there, my mind would wander back to the look in my grandfather's eyes, the pain etched so deeply into his features. At home, I'd retreat to my room, the same room where everything had changed. I'd sit at my desk, textbooks open, but my thoughts were elsewhere. I'd watch Liam, now lying at my feet, his tail thumping softly against the floor, oblivious to the storm he had unwittingly become a part of. Dinner times were the hardest. The clicking of cutlery, the mundane conversations about the weather, or the neighbors all felt like a facade. My grandfather would sit at the head of the table, his presence commanding yet distant. My parents, unaware of the undercurrents, would chatter on while I'd push food around my plate, the taste of guilt and confusion souring every bite. One evening, as the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I decided to take Liam for a walk. The cool air was a relief, a chance to breathe away from the stifling atmosphere of the house. As we walked, I noticed how Liam's leash was a lifeline, connecting me to something simple, something pure. We passed by Mrs. Henderson's house, her garden, a riot of colors, and she waved her smile warm. But her eyes curious. I wondered what she would think if she knew the secrets that lurked behind our well-kept facade. The walk was peaceful. The only sounds were the crunch of gravel under our feet and Liam's occasional bark at a passing squirrel. But peace was fleeting. My mind kept circling back to my grandfather, to the stories he'd shared, to the pain he carried. I knew I needed to address it, to speak with him, but the words felt like stones in my throat. How do you begin to heal a wound you've accidentally torn open? How do you rebuild trust when it's been so fundamentally shaken? As we returned home, the house loomed before us, its windows dark, reflecting the setting sun. I knew the conversation was inevitable, but for now I let the night envelop us, hoping the darkness would hide the turmoil within. The next day I resolved to talk to him, to face whatever consequences my actions had set in motion. But for now I would cling to the normalcy of my life, to the small, everyday interactions that seemed so trivial, yet were the threads holding my world together. The morning after our walk, the house felt like a different place. The usual sounds of breakfast preparation were tinged with a new kind of silence, one that was not just the absence of noise, but the presence of something unspoken, something heavy. I moved through the kitchen, my movements mechanical as I poured myself a cup of coffee. The steam rose, curling in the air, mirroring the confusion. In my mind, my grandfather was already at the table. His newspaper spread out before him, but his eyes were distant, not tracking the words on the page. I could feel his gaze on me as I sat down, the weight of it, like a physical touch. "Morning, Grandpa," I said, my voice fairly above a whisper, trying to bridge the gap that had formed between us. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine for a brief moment before he nodded, returning to his paper. The silence stretched, filled only by the ticking of the clock on the wall each second, a reminder of the conversation we were both avoiding. I knew I had to speak up, to address the elephant in the room. "Grandpa, about the other day," my voice trailed off. Unsure how to continue, he folded his newspaper, slowly setting it aside with deliberate care. "Isabella," he started, his voice steady, but with an undercurrent of something raw. "I think we need to talk." The air seemed to thicken, the room closing in around us. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and dread. This was the moment I had been both hoping for and dreading. He took a deep breath, his eyes now fixed on mine, searching for something. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about what I saw, and about what I told you. It stirred up a lot of old ghosts." I swallowed hard, the coffee now cold in my cup. "I didn't mean Toy didn't know you'd come in." I stammered my words, feeling inadequate. "I know," he said, his voice softening, "and I didn't mean to intrude. But seeing you like that, it brought back memories, painful ones. It's not about you, Isabella. It's about me, about my past." The confession hung between us, a shared burden. Now I could see the lines on his face, not just from age but from the weight of his experiences. "Sorry, Grandpa. I didn't want to hurt you." He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "I know, dear, and I'm sorry too for not handling it better. I've been carrying this pain for so long, and perhaps it's time I let some of it go." The conversation was like opening a valve, releasing pressure that had built up over years. We talked more about his ex-wife, about the betrayal he felt and how it had shaped his life. He spoke of forgiveness, not just for her, but for himself, for allowing the pain to define him. As we spoke, I felt a shift, not just in our relationship but within myself. Here was a man, my grandfather, who had faced a profound betrayal yet was now choosing to confront his pain to heal. It was a lesson in resilience, in the power of confronting one's demons. The day passed with a new understanding between us. We didn't solve everything in that one conversation, but we had started the process of healing. The house felt lighter, the tension not gone but eased, replaced by a tentative hope. Later that evening, as I sat in my room, Liam at my feet, I reflected on the day, the complexity of human emotions. The layers of pain and forgiveness were subjects I was studying in psychology, but living them was a different matter. I realized that my moment of vulnerability had not just exposed me, but had also opened a door for my grandfather to confront his past. It was a painful lesson, but perhaps in its own twisted way it was necessary. The narrative of our family, of our secrets, was still unfolding. What other shadows lurked in the corners of our home, and how would we as a family navigate through them? The path was uncertain, but for the first time in days I felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that we could face whatever came next together. As the days wore on, the initial relief from our conversation began to wane, replaced by a new unsettling tension. My grandfather's attempt at forgiveness seemed genuine, yet there was an undercurrent of something unresolved, something that whispered in the quiet corners of our home. One evening, as the sky darkened outside, the atmosphere inside our house grew thick with anticipation. My parents were out again, a dinner with friends, leaving the house to just me, my grandfather, and Liam. The silence was no longer comforting. It was charged electric with the unspoken. I was in the living room flipping through a psychology textbook, trying to distract myself from the looming sense of an impending storm. Liam lay at my feet, his soft snores a small comfort in the vast quiet. The sound of footsteps approached, and I looked up to see my grandfather standing in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the dim light from the hallway. "Isabella," he said, his voice steady but carrying a weight that made my heart sink. "There's something else we need to discuss." I closed the book, my fingers trembling slightly as I set it aside. "What is it, Grandpa?" He moved into the room, his steps slow and deliberate, as if each one was a decision made with great care. He sat down across from me, his eyes searching mine for a moment before he spoke. "I've been thinking about what happened, about my reaction, and about the past I shared with you." I nodded, feeling the gravity of his words. "I understand, Grandpa, we've talked about it," and I thought he held up a hand stopping me. "No, Isabella, there's more. After your grandmother passed, I found something, letters hidden away in her things. Letters from her Toto, someone else." The room seemed to tilt slightly as I processed his words. "Letters from Grandma." "Yes," he confirmed, his voice barely above a whisper. "She was unfaithful not just with the dog, but with another man. I never confronted her about it. I was too ashamed, too hurt to even speak of it. But now seeing you, it's like history repeating itself in a way I never imagined." The revelation hit like a physical blow. My grandmother, the woman I had idolized, had her own secrets, her own betrayals. "Why are you telling me this now?" My voice was a mix of confusion and hurt because he paused, his eyes misting over. "I need to understand why. Why did she do it? Why did she leave those letters for me to find? And now seeing you in that moment, I fear I've passed down more than just my genes, but perhaps a legacy of betrayal." The air was thick with the ghosts of the past, each revelation a thread pulling tighter around us. "Grandpa, I'm not her. What I did, it was a moment of weakness, not a pattern of deceit." He looked at me, his gaze intense. "No, Isabella, but the parallels are there and they haunt me. I've lived with this pain, this doubt for so long. I don't want you to carry it too." The room felt smaller, the walls closing in with the weight of our family's history. "What do you want from me, Grandpa? How can I help you heal from this?" He sighed a deep, weary sound. "I don't know, Isabella. I just know we need to face this together. We need to break this cycle. Whatever it takes." The conversation left us both drained, the air heavy with unresolved emotions. As he left the room, I sat there, the textbook forgotten, my mind racing with thoughts of legacy, betrayal, and the tangled web of family secrets. The night stretched on the silence, now a cacophony of whispers from the past. I knew that the Liam of our story was approaching, where choices would have to be made, where truths would need to be confronted. The path forward was murky, fraught with pain, but for the first time I felt a resolve to not just understand, but to change the narrative that had been handed down through generations. The house felt like a ship on stormy seas, and I was at the helm, navigating through the tempest of our family's history, hoping to steer us towards a new dawn where forgiveness and understanding could finally take root. The room was dark, the only light coming from the flickering candles on the mantelpiece, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. The house was silent, a heavy silence that seemed to press down on me as if the very air was holding its breath. I sat in the living room, my heart pounding the weight of our family's history, bearing down on me like a physical force. Liam, sensing the tension, had curled up by my feet, his presence a small comfort in the vast expanse of our shared unease. The door creaked open, and there stood my grandfather, his figure silhouetted against the dim hallway light. His eyes, usually so full of life, were now pools of sorrow and determination. "Isabella," he said, his voice, a whisper that carried the weight of years. "I've been thinking, and there's something we must do." I stood the book I was pretending to read, falling to the floor with a thud. "What is it, Grandpa?" He stepped into the room, his movements slow, as if each step was a decision he was still making. "We need to confront the past, not just ours, but the legacy of our family. We need to go to the place where it all began." I knew immediately where he meant: the old cabin, a place where my grandparents had spent their happiest and darkest moments. Now a mausoleum of memories. "Now tonight, yes," he confirmed, his gaze steady. "There's something there, something I've kept hidden, not just from you but from myself." The drive to the cabin was silent, the only sound, the hum of the car's engine and the occasional rustle of leaves. As we passed through the dense woods, the cabin appeared like a ghost in the moonlight, its windows dark, reflecting nothing but the night. Inside, the air was stale, filled with the scent of pine and old wood. My grandfather led me to the back room, where a single locked drawer in an ancient desk awaited us with trembling hands. He pulled out a key from his pocket, one I had never seen before. "This," he said, inserting the key into the lock, "is where I've kept the truth." The drawer opened with a reluctant creak, revealing a stack of letters yellowed with age. He handed them to me, his hands shaking. "Read them, Isabella. Understand what your grandmother did and why I've been so haunted." I took the letters, the paper brittle under my touch. Each word was a confession, a plea for forgiveness, an explanation of a love affair that had torn my grandfather's heart. The letters spoke of a man, a neighbor, someone I had never heard of, and of a love that was both passionate and doomed. As I read, tears blurred my vision, the pain in those words, the longing, the guilt. It was palpable, as if the ink itself carried the weight of my grandmother's emotions. When I finished, I looked up at my grandfather, his face lined with the years of carrying this secret. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "Because," he said, his voice cracking, "I loved her, Isabella. Despite everything, I loved her, and I didn't want our family to remember her as someone who betrayed us. But now, seeing you, I realized that by hiding this, I might have let the cycle continue." The room felt colder, the shadows deeper. "What do we do now, Grandpa?" He took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. "We break the cycle. We confront the truth, not just of her infidelity, but of the pain it caused, the secrets we've kept. We talk to your parents, to everyone. We heal together." The decision was monumental, a turning point. I could see the relief in his eyes, a burden lifting even as he faced the storm of revelations to come. We left the cabin, the letters in my bag, a testament to the past we were now ready to face. The drive back was different. The silence was not of avoidance, but of contemplation, of preparing for the difficult conversations ahead. Back at home, we sat at the kitchen table, the same place where so many family meals had been shared, now a stage for confession. My parents, confused and concerned, listened as my grandfather spoke, his voice steady but filled with emotion. The revelations were like a storm breaking over our family. There were tears, anger, disbelief, but also slowly understanding. We talked through the night, unraveling the threads of our family's history, each revelation a step towards understanding and healing. As the dawn broke, casting a soft light through the kitchen window, we sat in a silence that was no longer heavy with secrets, but with the weight of truth. My grandfather, his eyes weary yet resolute, looked at each of us, his family with a newfound clarity. "I've carried this burden alone for too long," he said, his voice hoarse from the night's confessions. "But now, having shared it, I feel lighter, not just for myself but for all of us." He said, his voice hoarse from the night's confessions. "But now, sharing it, I feel lighter not just for myself but for all of us. My mother, her face streaked with tears, reached out to him. Dad, why didn't you tell us sooner? We could have helped you carry this. He took her hand, squeezing it gently. I was afraid of the judgment, the pain it would cause. But Isabella, he turned to me, your vulnerability, your honesty. It showed me that hiding doesn't heal, confronting does. My father, who had been mostly silent, spoke up. We've all made mistakes, had our secrets, but it's how we move forward that defines us. We need to forgive not just each other but ourselves. The conversation shifted then from the past to the future. We discussed therapy not just for my grandfather, but for all of us to navigate the complex emotions that had surfaced. We talked about rebuilding trust, about the importance of communication, and about breaking the cycles of pain that had been passed down through generations. Dear friends, thank you very much for watching. Leave comments, put likes, share with friends, and subscribe to the channel.